Every December, Betty Crocker filled America's kitchens with Christmas cookies that felt as essential as the tree itself, yet dozens of them quietly vanished from holiday tables, from the delicate Zimtsterne stars to the intricate Christmas bells and fragile Parisian orange cookies. Many of her most memorable recipes survive only in faded holiday editions. Today, we're bringing back 25 of those forgotten Christmas cookies, starting with one of the rarest. Zimtsterne. This cookie appeared quietly in early Betty Crocker holiday collections. Borrowed from old Swiss Christmas traditions and folded into America's mid-century baking habits, they were beautiful on a cookie plate, pale, pointed, and topped with a thin white glaze. But they were also exacting, which made them rare, even in their own era. Hands mixed finely ground almonds with sugar and egg white, until the dough formed a stiff, workable mass. Wax paper helped flatten the mixture into an even sheet before cutters pressed out the 6-point shapes. A small bowl of beaten egg white provided the glossy topping, carefully brushed on so the points wouldn't soften. Bakers let each cookie air dry before baking, a step Betty Crocker stressed to keep the tops smooth. A holiday batch cost about 25 cents then, roughly $5 today. As almond prices rose and holiday baking grew more hurried, home cooks turned toward butter-based doughs that were easier to handle and quicker to produce. The next cookie held on to that holiday elegance, but added a surprising ingredient: cream cheese. Cheese dainties. These came from the company best pages of Betty Crocker's cookie collections, a place reserved for showpiece holiday treats. They weren't savory, despite the name. The cream cheese simply gave the dough a soft, pastry-like texture that made them stand out on a Christmas tray. They tasted like a cross between a cookie and a tiny turnover, which is likely why families remembered them, even if they rarely went back to make them again. The dough began with softened cream cheese beaten with butter until smooth, then mixed with flour to form a pliable base. Bakers rolled the dough thin, cut squares, and spooned a dot of jam into the center. Each corner folded neatly over the filling before the cookies were lifted to a lined sheet for baking. Once cooled, a soft snowfall of powdered sugar finished them. A tray cost about 30 cents then, nearer $6 today. They faded because they required precision at every step. Too much jam and they burst. Too little and they dried out. When easier drop-style Christmas cookies became the norm, cheese dainties quietly slipped out of rotation. Their disappearance opened the door for another decorative idea, shaping the design inside the dough itself: Christmas bells. These were Betty Crocker's clever attempt to help home bakers create festive shapes without cutters or piping. They appeared in holiday pages as a reliable crowd pleaser, bright, colorful, and tidy. The kind of cookie that made a plate look planned rather than assembled. Their rarity today comes from their reliance on icebox technique, a style many modern bakers no longer use. 2 bowls of dough formed the base, one tinted red and the other left plain. Each was rolled into a rectangle of even thickness. Bakers stacked the sheets, pressed them gently to fuse the layers, and trimmed the edges clean. Wax paper helped shape the long log into a soft arc, giving the cookie its bell-like outline. After a long chill, thin slices revealed the red border, framing the pale center. The pieces went onto a cool sheet and baked until the edges set. A batch cost around 22 cents in the mid-century era, about $4 in modern ingredients. They disappeared as pre-made holiday doughs, shaped cookies, and ready-to-bake assortments filled grocery shelves, offering similar visual appeal with none of the preparation. A delicate texture defined the next cookie, which leaned into citrus and thin, crisp edges. Parisian orange cookies. These stood out in the cookie book for being thin, crisp, and unusually elegant, a kind of holiday tea cookie rather than a typical Christmas treat. Their rarity came from that very quality. They demanded precision, attention, and careful handling. Cooks mixed softened butter with sugar and grated orange rind before adding beaten eggs and flour. The dough spread easily, so bakers dropped small spoonfuls onto a greased sheet, leaving wide gaps for the cookies to fan outward. As they baked, the centers settled into flat circles with gently browned rims. Once cool, each cookie lifted carefully from the sheet using a thin spatula, then stacked between layers of wax paper to prevent breakage. A batch cost around 15 cents in its time, closer to $3 today. These cookies faded as thicker, sturdier Christmas varieties became the norm, leaving their delicate texture out of step with holiday expectations. Before moving on, one question for longtime holiday bakers. Did any of these rare, early Betty Crocker Christmas cookies ever show up on your family's holiday trays? Butterscotch lace cookies. These fragile lace cookies appeared in Betty Crocker's holiday sections as a special occasion treat. Thin, delicate, and nearly transparent once baked, they looked striking on a Christmas tray but required precise timing, which made them rare even in their own era. Betty Crocker often placed them beside sturdier bars, signaling that these were for patient holiday bakers. Hands melted butter in a small saucepan before stirring in brown sugar and corn syrup. Flour and rolled oats followed until the mixture thickened. Bakers spooned tiny portions onto a greased sheet, each dot no larger than a coin. Heat spread the batter into lace-like circles that crisped within minutes. Once cooled slightly, they lifted with a thin spatula and were stacked between wax paper layers so they wouldn't fuse. A batch cost around 18 cents then, closer to $4 today. They disappeared because small temperature shifts caused them to over-brown or crumble, and modern bakers gravitated toward recipes that held their shape with less attention. Their fragility also made them impractical for cookie swaps or school trays. The next cookie kept the holiday fruit theme, but shifted it into a bar that aged well in a tin white fruit bars. These appeared in Betty Crocker's Christmas recommendations as a pale, snowy alternative to dense fruitcake. They relied on coconut, citron, and nuts. Ingredients once central to holiday baking but rarely kept in modern kitchens. They were also promoted as a cookie that improved after resting, which made them useful for early holiday prep. Cooks creamed butter and sugar, then beat in eggs, flour, and baking powder. A bowl of chopped coconut, candied citron, and walnuts folded into the batter, giving it a speckled white look. Bakers spread the mixture into a shallow, parchment-lined pan and smoothed it with a spatula. Once baked, the bars cooled on a wire rack before being cut into small, pale squares with bits of fruit throughout. A pan cost about 30 cents then, nearer $7 today, due to nut and coconut prices. They faded as holiday tastes moved away from citron and candied peel, ingredients that were once easy to find, but gradually became seasonal and specialty only. That shift left the recipe anchored firmly in mid-century Christmas baking. The next cookie kept the fruit, but aimed more directly at tray appeal, holiday fruit cookies. These bar-style cookies came from pages designed to fill large Christmas assortments. They combined mixed candied fruits with a lightly spiced batter, producing bright slices that stood out on a crowded tray. Their appeal was visual first, which may be why they didn't survive long past their mid-century moment. Betty Crocker often suggested them for open houses, where color on a platter mattered as much as flavor. Hands creamed butter with sugar and added eggs until smooth. Flour, baking powder, and a mild spice blend stirred in next. Red, green, and gold candied fruits folded through the dough. Bakers pressed the mixture into a lined pan, flattened it with a metal spatula, and baked it until firm. Once cool, the bars cut into neat rectangles with jewel-like pieces. Showing through the cross-section, a batch cost roughly 28 cents then, around $6 now. They disappeared as candied fruit became harder to find outside holiday aisles, and most families favored chocolate-based cookies instead. Their quiet exit mirrored a national shift away from the fruit and nut profile that once defined Christmas baking. Their decline made space for one of Betty Crocker's most decorative ideas, a cookie with a hidden filling. Fruit, peanut-filled jeweled cookies. These appeared in holiday booklets, as ornate treats meant to impress with both color and texture. Each held a peanut filling wrapped in dough and rolled in chopped candied fruit. They were small, bright, and memorable, but required more steps than most bakers were willing to take during a busy season. Cooks rolled small portions of dough into balls and pressed a tiny spoonful of peanut filling inside. Each ball closed neatly before being dipped in egg white and rolled in finely chopped candied fruit. The cookies baked on parchment until the fruit adhered and the edges set. Once cooled, they arranged neatly on a tray, each piece catching light from nearby decorations. A batch cost about 25 cents then, closer to $5 today. They faded because the preparation was slow and candied fruit lost its place in everyday baking. When simpler Christmas cookies dominated later decades, these jeweled centers were quietly left behind. By 1975, most American supermarkets sold fewer than half the candied fruit varieties they carried in the 1950s. Which of these fruit-forward recipes looks most familiar to you, or have they all vanished from your Christmas tables? Lemon Snowdrops. These were one of the more delicate sandwich cookies from the Betty Crocker cookie book, pale, soft, and dusted in powdered sugar. They looked elegant on holiday tables, but required several steps, which made them uncommon outside households with experienced bakers. Their combination of bright citrus and gentle sweetness stood apart from the heavier flavors that dominated mid-century Christmas trays. Hands creamed butter with sugar before beating an egg yolk and finely grated lemon rind. Flour folded in to form a smooth dough, which bakers rolled into small balls and set on a lined sheet. Once baked, the cookies cooled on a rack, while a bowl of simple lemon filling, butter, powdered sugar, and more zest was stirred until creamy. Each pair of cookies sandwiched around a thin smear of filling, then rolled lightly in powdered sugar to mimic fresh snow. A batch cost around 22 cents then, roughly $4 today. They faded because sandwich cookies doubled the workload and required careful storage to keep the filling from softening the crumb. The next cookie came from the same era, but leaned into richness rather than lightness. Austrian cream cookies. These appeared in Betty Crocker's European-influenced section and were often suggested for holiday trays as a crisp, slightly sweet alternative to heavier cutouts. Their defining feature was the use of heavy cream in the dough, which produced a modest sweetness and a tender bite. They felt refined, but were structurally simple, which made their decline surprising. Hands whipped softened butter with flour, cream, and a small amount of sugar until the dough came together. Bakers rolled it thin on a floured board, cut simple shapes, and arranged them on an ungreased sheet. While they baked, a small bowl of glaze, powdered sugar mixed with milk, waited on the counter. Once the cookies cooled, the glaze brushed across the tops dried to a soft sheen that looked festive against the lightly browned edges. A tray cost about 18 cents then, roughly $4 now. They disappeared as home bakers favored sweeter, more decorative cookies, and cream-based doughs fell out of fashion due to storage concerns. The next recipe took richness even further with fruit and coconut built directly into the dough. Cherry coconut bars. These appeared in both holiday and company best pages of Betty Crocker booklets. They were bright, sturdy, and easy to transport, everything holiday bakers needed for church events or school gatherings. Their cheerful red candied cherries and coconut layers made them visually appealing, but their flavor profile eventually fell behind more modern preferences. Cooks beat butter with sugar, then added eggs and flour to form a soft batter, chopped candied cherries, and shredded coconut folded in until the mixture looked speckled and dense. Bakers spread the dough into a parchment-lined pan and pressed it into the corners with a spatula. Once baked, the bars cooled slightly before being cut into small squares to reveal the red and white interior. A pan cost around 25 cents then, closer to $5 today. They faded as candied cherries lost popularity and coconut-forward desserts became less common in mainstream holiday baking. The next cookie worked in a different direction, pale, minty, and surprisingly soft. Mint melt-away cookies. These appeared in the cookie book as a seasonal variation on simple butter cookies, but were recommended most often for Christmas. Their appeal came from their texture, tender, soft, and capable of dissolving quickly, which set them apart from the traditional crispness of holiday cookies. Hands creamed butter with powdered sugar until light, then stirred in flour and a drop of peppermint flavoring. The dough rolled easily into small balls that held their shape on parchment. Once baked, they cooled briefly before being topped with a thin glaze tinted pale green. A dusting of coarse sugar added a frosted look that suited holiday trays. A batch cost about 16 cents then, around $3 today. They disappeared because peppermint flavoring varied widely by brand, and inconsistent results made many bakers move on to more reliable cookies. Their soft texture also made them fragile in tins and transport. A crisp, nutty profile defined the next entry, one that required careful handling from start to finish. Peanut thins. These were extremely slim bar cookies included in Betty Crocker's mid-century cookie guides. They were baked flat, cut into rectangles, and frosted lightly once cooled. Their thinness offered an elegant texture, but it also made them prone to breaking, which limited how often they appeared in large holiday assortments. Hands stirred melted butter with sugar and a beaten egg, then mixed in flour and finely chopped peanuts until the dough formed a smooth, pourable consistency. Bakers spread the mixture into a shallow pan lined with parchment, smoothing it thinly with a spatula to ensure even baking. Once done, the bars cooled long enough to set before a thin layer of frosting brushed over the top. After the glaze dried, the sheet cut easily into narrow bars. A pan cost about 20 cents then, roughly $4 now. Peanut thins disappeared as chunkier, more durable cookies dominated holiday trays, and as nut allergies in schools made peanut desserts less common. By 1972, bar cookies made up nearly a third of Christmas baking, but within 2 decades they were replaced by decorated cutout cookies as the holiday favorite. Pecan crisps. These appeared in the cookie book as one of Betty Crocker's thinnest nut cookies, a crisp, lightly sweet treat that baked quickly and broke even faster. They were ideal for adding texture to a Christmas tray, but required careful handling, which limited how often families made them. Hands beat, softened butter with brown sugar until smooth, then added an egg and a small amount of vanilla flour, and finely chopped pecans folded in to create a dough that spread easily. Bakers dropped small spoonfuls onto a lined sheet, leaving wide gaps so the cookies could flatten without merging. They baked in minutes, turning light brown around the edges. After a brief cooling period, a thin spatula lifted them to a rack before they grew too firm to move. A batch cost around 24 cents then, closer to $5 today. Their fragility, along with rising pecan prices, pushed them out of regular Christmas rotation. A sturdier, honey-sweetened option followed next. Merry Christmas cookies. These were honey-sweetened cutouts, featured in mid-century Betty Crocker Christmas editions. They produced a soft, golden dough that held its shape well, making them useful for stars, bells, and other simple holiday silhouettes. Their gentle sweetness made them popular with children, but honey prices and changing tastes eventually pushed them aside. Bakers creamed softened butter with sugar, then mixed in honey and an egg until smooth. Flour, baking powder, and a mild spice blend formed a dough that rolled cleanly on a lightly floured board. Cookie cutters pressed festive shapes that transferred easily to a lined sheet. Once baked, the cookies cooled briefly before being brushed with a thin glaze made from powdered sugar and milk. The finish dried to a soft shine that looked festive without needing decorations. A batch cost about 22 cents then, nearer $5 today. These cookies faded as stronger, richer flavors became standard on Christmas trays, and honey-forward sweets became less common. A much older recipe followed, bringing gentle spice and a soft texture to the holiday table. Ginger creams. These traced back to early gold medal and Betty Crocker prize recipes, long before they appeared in the cookie book. Moist, cake-like, and lightly frosted, they contrasted sharply with crisp holiday cutouts. Their softer texture made them prone to sticking in tins, which limited their popularity in Christmas assortments. Hands creamed butter with sugar, then beat in an egg flour sifted with baking soda, ginger, and cinnamon, folded in alternately with buttermilk until the batter smoothed. Bakers dropped spoonfuls onto a greased sheet, spacing them evenly. Once baked, the cookies cooled on a wire rack before receiving a thin vanilla glaze that settled into a soft coating. A tray cost around 18 cents then, roughly $4 today. They disappeared as holiday baking shifted toward cookies with longer shelf lives and sturdier textures. The next cookie solved that problem by building structure directly into the dough cream wafers. These were delicate sandwich cookies made from a simple dough of butter, cream, and flour. They offered a tender bite and a light sweetness, making them stand out on a holiday tray. But their multi-step process, rolling, cutting, baking, cooling, and filling, kept them from becoming a widespread favorite. Hands combined butter and flour before adding heavy cream to form a soft dough. Bakers rolled it thin, cut small rounds, and dipped each piece in sugar before arranging them on an ungreased sheet. The cookies baked quickly, puffing slightly while maintaining their delicate texture. Once cooled, pears sandwiched around a small spoonful of lightly tinted buttercream, creating a pastel-filled center. A batch cost about 19 cents then, around $4 today. They declined as bakers favored simpler cookies requiring fewer steps and less assembly time. A more decorative holiday shape followed, pairing a crisp base with a festive finish, snowflakes. These appeared in later Betty Crocker editions as decorative cutouts coated with chocolate and chopped nuts. Their layered look made them a visual highlight, but they required both precise shaping and careful topping, which made them less approachable than simple sugar cookies. Bakers rolled a lightly sweetened dough on a floured surface and cut uniform snowflake shapes. Each piece transferred to a lined sheet and baked until firm around the edges. Once cool, a bowl of melted chocolate waited beside finely chopped pistachios or walnuts. Bakers dipped the cookies halfway into the chocolate, then pressed the coated portion into the nuts. The decorated pieces rested on wax paper until a batch cost about 26 cents, then roughly $6 today. They fell out of use as pre-decorated holiday cookies and ready-to-bake kits replaced more intricate methods. By 1980, decorated cutouts had become the most common Christmas cookie in American households. Brown sugar snowflakes. These surfaced in later Betty Crocker Christmas editions as a richer alternative to standard cutouts. They kept the familiar snowflake shape but used brown sugar for a deeper color and slightly softer texture. They offered a subtle change to holiday trays but never gained the popularity of their lighter counterparts. Hands creamed butter with brown sugar until smooth, then added an egg and a small amount of vanilla. Flour and baking powder formed a soft dough that rolled easily on a lightly floured board. Bakers pressed snowflake cutters into the dough, transferring each piece to a lined sheet. After baking, the cookies cooled just long enough to firm before a light dusting of powdered sugar highlighted their shape. A batch cost around 23 cents then, roughly $5 today. They disappeared because the darker dough made intricate snowflake designs harder to see, and most bakers preferred brighter colors for decorated Christmas cookies. A brighter citrus version followed in the next recipe. Sparkling lemon snowflakes. These appeared as a modernized version of earlier citrus cookies, adding grated lemon rind and coarse sugar for shine. They stood out on a tray with their bright tops, but required more steps than standard sugar cookies, which limited how often they were made. Cooks creamed, softened butter with sugar, mixed in an egg, and added flour with a spoonful of grated lemon rind. After chilling the dough briefly, bakers rolled it thin and cut snowflake shapes. The unbaked cookies received a light brush of water and a sprinkle of coarse sugar, which baked into a subtle sparkle. Once cooled, they arranged neatly on wax paper to preserve their crisp edges. A batch cost about 18 cents then, closer to $4 now. They faded because citrus-based holiday cookies became less common, and decorators often chose frosting over coarse sugar for visual impact. A mid-century favorite followed next, bringing bright color and a distinctive texture to Christmas trays. Cherry Winks. These were a signature mid-century holiday cookie credited widely to Betty Crocker and featured in multiple Christmas-themed booklets. Their distinctive look, dough rolled in crushed cornflakes and topped with a red cherry, made them easy to spot on any holiday tray. Their flavor, however, depended heavily on candied cherries, which gradually fell out of favor. Hands creamed butter with sugar, then added an egg and a small amount of milk. Flour, chopped pecans, and chopped dates folded in, creating a dough with plenty of texture. Bakers rolled small balls of dough in crushed cornflakes before placing each piece on a lined sheet. A single halved cherry pressed into the center added the signature color. After baking, the cookies cooled on a rack until crisp. A batch cost around 30 cents then, roughly $6 today. They disappeared as cornflake-coated cookies declined in popularity and as many bakers turned away from candied cherries in favor of chocolate or peppermint-based holiday flavors. The next cookie stayed firmly in the Christmas tradition, simple, shaped, and widely remembered: candy cane cookies. These became one of the most recognizable Betty Crocker holiday treats, built from twisted ropes of red and white dough. They looked festive, held their shape well, and became a favorite for families with children who enjoyed helping twist the pieces. Their decline came not from difficulty, but from changing tastes and the rise of pre-baked candy cane-shaped cookies in grocery stores. Hands divided a basic butter cookie dough into 2 bowls, tinting one portion red. Bakers rolled thin ropes from each color, twisted them together, and curved the top into a hook. The canes set on a lined sheet and baked until the edges firmed. After cooling, a light sprinkle of crushed peppermint or coarse sugar added a subtle finish. A batch cost about 20 cents then, nearer $4 today. They faded as families moved toward simpler baking traditions or purchased ready-made decorated cookies instead of shaping dough by hand. By 1985, more than a third of American households relied on store-bought Christmas cookies instead of baking at home. Christmas, Cooky House. Included as a centerpiece project in Betty Crocker's Cookie Carnival materials, the Christmas Cooky House functioned more as a holiday craft than a dessert. Families approached it as an all-afternoon activity, assembling panels of gingerbread into a small house decorated with candies and royal icing. The booklet encouraged children to participate, but the construction required patient hands and a generous amount of counter space, which made it memorable yet impractical for many households. Preparation typically began by creaming butter with sugar in a large bowl, then adding eggs, molasses, and a blend of ginger, cinnamon, and cloves. Flour folded in gradually until a firm dough formed. Bakers rolled the dough into broad sheets and used the included templates to cut out the walls, roof pieces, windows, and chimney. Each panel baked until rigid enough to stand, then cooled completely on a flat surface, so the edges could be trimmed clean with a sharp knife. Once ready, thick royal icing acted as structural glue, holding the pieces upright as the house took shape. Colored sugar, gumdrops, and small cookies decorated the finished model, turning it into a display piece rather than an edible item. A full set of panels cost around 40 cents then, closer to $10 today. Its decline began when pre-packaged gingerbread kits arrived in grocery stores, removing the need for rolling, cutting, or trimming while preserving the tradition itself. A simpler, more hands-on tradition emerged from the same booklet, bringing those ginger spice flavors into a format anyone could help shape. Gingerbread Boys. Patterns printed in Betty Crocker's holiday materials encouraged families to trace gingerbread boy outlines onto cardboard, making reusable templates for years to come. This small step added personality to each batch, and the sturdy dough made them ideal for decorating during school events or family gatherings. Over time, however, an abundance of gingerbread man recipes entered the market, softening the distinct identity of the Betty Crocker version. Mixing began by creaming softened butter with granulated sugar. Molasses and an egg followed, creating the deep brown color associated with classic gingerbread flour, sifted with baking soda, ginger, and cinnamon folded in gradually until the dough reached a workable firmness. After chilling briefly, the dough rolled smoothly across a floured board. The cardboard pattern pressed clean shapes into the surface, and a thin spatula transferred each figure to a baking sheet. Once baked and cooled, a simple glaze of powdered sugar and milk outlined the edges, while raisins, chocolate drops, or small candies created faces and buttons. A batch cost about 20 cents then, around $4 today. These cookies faded as ready-made gingerbread figures appeared in bakeries, and as families opted for simpler projects that didn't require patterns or hand cutting. The final cookie in this group linked Christmas baking directly to a well-known General Mills staple, Wheaties Drop Cookies. Holiday booklets highlighted Wheaties Drop Cookies as a thrifty, easy option for families wanting a lower-cost addition to their Christmas trays. The recipe relied on crushed cereal to add crunch and lightness, connecting the cookie directly to the broader General Mills pantry. Early versions depended on the cereal's texture, which changed over time as formulations shifted, leaving modern attempts slightly different from those made decades ago. Dough preparation involved beating butter with sugar until fluffy, then mixing in an egg and a splash of vanilla flour folded in next, followed by crushed Wheaties that gave the mixture its speckled rustic appearance. Spoonfuls of dough dropped neatly onto a lined baking sheet and baked until the edges turned crisp and the centers set. A few minutes of cooling allowed the cookies to firm up while preserving the cereal's crunch. Stored carefully between layers of wax paper, they held up well for days. A batch cost about 12 cents then, roughly $3 today. Their decline reflected a broader drop in cereal-based desserts, as richer chocolate cookies, peppermint-flavored treats, and heavily decorated cutouts became more common on Christmas trays. Changing cereal textures over the years also made the original version harder to replicate. By 1978, cereal-based cookies accounted for less than 5% of Christmas baking, despite being a common feature in mid-century holiday booklets. Before we look back on everything these old recipes once meant, here's a question that often brings forgotten holiday moments to the surface. Do you remember any of these Betty Crocker traditions? The Cooky House, the patterned gingerbread boys, or the cereal-based drop cookies appearing on your family's holiday table? Please let us know in the comments below. Christmas baking looked different in the decades when these recipes first appeared. Kitchens relied on simple tools, recipe cards were kept in tins, and the Betty Crocker holiday books shaped how families filled their tables. Many of these cookies disappeared as ingredients changed, as packaged doughs took over, and as households shifted toward quicker traditions. Yet the old methods still show how much care went into holiday baking, rolling, cutting, brushing, stacking, and assembling each piece by hand. If any of these forgotten cookies brought back a memory from your own home kitchen, there are still more stories waiting in those old books. Tap like and subscribe so you never miss the next chapter.